Welcome everyone to the Maltego podcast. Today we've got Ritu Gill. She's joining us all the way from Canada. And also today we have Carlos, who's one of our subject matter experts. Hey, Carlos, good to have you as well. And there's me, your regular host, Brad, part of the Kia Global Key Account Management team. So let's get started. Let me introduce our guest, Ritu. She's been involved with OSINT and research for the, let's say, the better part of 15 years. She's also had some experience with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. She's also set up a consulting business providing OSINT training and research to law enforcement. I mean, this all sounds amazing. Ritu, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into OSINT?
Hey, thanks, Brad and Carlos. I'm happy to be here with you guys today. To give you a little background, what got me into OSINT was actually I heard about this OSINT thing back when I was working with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And that's when I started getting interested and started reading and learning more about what it was. I know it was being used in, investigations, and there were some people that were called experts. And so that's where I think I got myself just right into it and got more curious as I started reading more about it and how it was being used. I'm going to say self-motivation was huge to get me into that because of my curiosity. It just kept going and kept evolving. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, very cool. I think one of the most interesting things here is about self-motivation and really digging into what's out there with what you learn and where you go to. What were the resources you started really learning with?
The resources I started with, I'm going to say, I remember hearing a lot about Michael Bazell back then, and I know he had a book at least. I don't know how many editions he had at that point, but that's when I think I purchased the book and I started reading it and just seeing hey, what is this, right? I also started Googling things. I started doing my own research when it came to, what is OSINT, the history of OSINT, or, how other people were blogging about it. So really it was just getting as much information as I could on how people were applying it. And I really think when you start doing the research and, if you have a computer, get on a search engine, start looking up OSINT, I started looking up anything to do with really it would be one article that would lead me to another kind of thing. And there were articles, whether it was on, whatever blogging sites, but those are the ones that got me curious. And then I would just keep moving on, right? I would try some of the techniques too. And one of the other things was, I ended up spending up a lot of time looking at targets on social media platforms. And there was at a point where I started kind of creating my own techniques, which was kind of neat. And then sharing it with my team, which was really cool. Because I'm like, okay, I think I get how this kind of works. But yeah, that's kind of how it went down for me.
Sounds really cool, Ritu. And probably in all those years, all your brain cells have been working with many different interesting projects. But I think the people who will be now listening to you might be interested in which were your most passionate projects and probably the ones that you have been investing your days and nights most time on.
Yeah. So when you talk about passion projects, one of the things I could highlight is earlier in the beginning of the year. So because I'm from British Columbia, a province in Canada. specifically in Metro Vancouver, we have an issue with gangs. There's a gang conflict out here where there's a lot of shootings related to those gangs. So one of my kind of passion projects was, okay, we see this issue, and I'm no expert in gangs or anything, but I'm an OSINT person who can visualize kind of what's going on in my own community. And that's what I did by creating a Google map of the current kind of situation. So I call it the 2021 Metro Vancouver shootings map. Obviously, I'll have to retitle that because we have a new year around the corner. But what I did here was on a Google map, I would track all the shootings in Metro Vancouver related to the Lower Mainland, our area conflict. And if you're wondering how I did that, it's all through open source information. And then I threw on the locations of where the incident occurred. And then not only did that, it kind of evolved because first it was just a list of, hey, this person was shot at this location or this person was. But what I wanted to do was highlight the difference between the residential versus public shootings, because as public safety is a huge thing for us in law enforcement, I wanted to highlight, hey, like when we're seeing more in the public kind of sector, that's a big problem. And so, yeah, I created this visualization of what that looked like. So you can see the difference. I think I used red for the public shootings, and I used the color black for the ones that were like residential, so at someone's house. So those pose less of a risk to the public, but I got a lot of positive feedback on that map. Lots of views on it. And yeah, I think people are still currently using it as a resource. So I was happy about that it kind of went somewhere. But I literally did it as a passion project over a weekend, just for fun.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Actually, what I was curious about was how the feedback was. What people were saying about it. I'm sure people in the law enforcement sector. Let's not get into too many details about that. But what did they feel about you doing or compiling this sort of geospatial, time-spatial map in terms of what was really happening in this area?
Yeah, the feedback was definitely positive. I would say what people liked the most, they were like, hey, well, we read about this stuff all the time, every week or every couple of weeks, whatever was happening. But they're like, you've put it in, you've visualized it for us, which has more of an impact to see how concerning it can be when these things are happening in your neighborhoods, in your communities. So definitely, I think people appreciated that aspect because I guess maybe there hasn't been anything out there like that. I know people have done similar things over the years, but usually I think I remember one that was related to just murders, whereas this is not just murders. It's actually even if someone was shot at. So yeah, the feedback from the community, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, like, thanks for doing this. And, thanks for creating this. So for me, I assume people are using it, but I did get a lot of positive feedback in terms of, hey, this helps us, see what's going on, because it's hard to keep track of all the news media articles where I've been on top of it. I'm going to say for the most part, and try to update the map pretty much daily as I see things happen. If I see something happen, it goes right in there. I usually don't wait more than a day to upload it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely it's been really great that way.
Wow, pretty amazing. I think many of the people who probably contacted you during the last years, they are passionate like you, people who maybe they are trying to develop their skills, and probably they want to have your feedback in order to understand how you can get into this field, to better understand in a professional way how you consider nowadays that people who are in the information security industries or coming from other fields can get into the OSINT space, like giving this your tricks or your tips for landing into this space.
Okay, so you're asking if somebody's kind of new to OSINT, how they could get into it? Is that essentially?
Yeah, or they already started, but they want to dedicate full time to this space, and probably they want to, considering nowadays needs from what you have seen in the industry, the different parts, that what are the skills or how is the best way to land into this field.
Okay, yeah. So I think, well, just as a takeaway, like out of all the years I've been doing open source, one skill that I think is really important is the ability for one to think critically. Like, I think that's a really, really important skill. And when we can look at something and look at it critically and ask all the right questions or all the questions to reach a common goal, I think that's really important when it comes to even open source, because without the analysis and without the thought process, you end up with just information. It's not actually intelligence. So I think it's really, if people have the ability to take courses related to whether it's analytical thinking or analytical writing, or there's courses. I know the government of Canada does offer courses. I'm sure there's other courses as well, but there's ones related to thinking critically. So it gets you thinking of how you can look at information a different way. And that's really important for open source, because like I said, if we don't add any value to what we find, it is just information at the end of the day. It's raw data, and that's not enough for us to accomplish our goals. I can take that further if you'd like. There's also, people will ask sometimes, like, what matters the most when it comes to being like a OSINT practitioner. Over the years, there's been a few things that stuck out to me. I'm going to say one thing. One thing is being articulate. So when I say being articulate, it essentially means having the ability to explain the why, the what, the how of your actions when you've conducted your online research. And this means having a thorough understanding of OSINT tools you use. And regardless of OSINT tools you use, you have to be ready to explain what you did, when you did it, how you did it, and so on. And some people are saying, like, hey, why? Well, because some files, because I work for a government agency, I could end up in court. And so you want to make sure you know what you're doing. But even if you don't work for a government agency, you'll have a customer or a client, and you want to make sure that you can explain your work, right? Explain what you did. They will have questions. So that's one really important thing to keep in mind. Other things I can think of are, tenacity, being tenacious. I think you want to be curious and you don't want to give up, because having that problem solver mindset is really important, and being persistent, because there's going to be times where it's not so clear what you're looking at, or there's going to be times where you can't find what you're hoping to find. But it means things like, so you might, if I have a name of, I'll just say John Smith, but there's times where you can't find your target, but it's being, again, curious, not giving up. But there's been times where I'm searching for a subject, but I'm having to consider alternative, like, spellings of their name, or, hey, nicknames they might use, or aliases. I've had it where there are people spelling their surname backwards to throw off probably law enforcement, but that's happened before. And it's, again, having that, okay, like, how are we gonna, sometimes there isn't information to find, But for me, it's like I want to turn over every rock I could find before I give up. So yeah, that's just one example of I think if you have that kind of problem solver mindset and keep the persistence, keep going, and get the job done.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful detail. I think based on what you mentioned, that at the end, the technical skills are not the most important thing. Of course, you need to know the tools. You need to have the ability, if it's necessary, to dig deeper into the technical details. But I think you pointed out something very important, that the most important thing is to have this investigative mindset, to think critically. You mentioned document thoroughly and be having this tenacity. So definitely that's a must for the OSINTer today. So Brad?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because when I was studying penetration testing and all this kind of, what they call hacking, which I don't think is really the fairest term to use, but
Right.
you always talk about the hacker's mentality, but it's got a lot more to do with tenacity and how persistent you are with your studying, with what tools you use, with how good you become at doing certain or running certain techniques. And one of the most underrated things is reporting.
Right.
Not a lot of people actually focus on how important reporting is, and in OSINT, I think in most of the industries, when it comes to OSINT and investigations, reporting is super important, right?
Right.
So are there specific tools and techniques that you do use in your investigations on a sort of daily basis, or is it something that you also create by yourself?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So definitely, I just want to mention one thing. You say reporting, that's huge actually when it comes to open source, because I always say save your findings, right? Save your people think, the internet is ever evolving, changing so quickly that if you don't take the time and capture what you see in front of you, it could be gone, the next day. It could, and some people are like, okay, the target may have removed something, but also platforms, if it's something that violates their policies, they might remove content as well. One thing I can speak to, so when you say like, is there anything you use every day? Well, when it comes to capturing, I'm going to say a software that I recommend, and I'm sure you guys have heard of it, is called Hunchly. So it's specifically for online investigations. It was developed by Justin Seitz, a pretty cool guy in the OSINT community, and it pretty much automates your capturing process. And you do this through, well, you purchase the software, you add their add-on, and literally the click of a button, you can start capturing what you see there. That includes metadata as well. Some of the hashing and stuff that sometimes you need for things that go to court. So I would say when it comes to capturing, but at the same time, not everybody needs to use Hunchly. Some people, that's definitely what I would like recommend, but there's also other softwares out there. Things like Snagit. I use that often as well, because I like their video capture function. So the idea at the end of the day, when it comes to, since we've kind of gone to that topic of capturing, is when you're capturing information, it's really important to not only capture what you're looking at, but it's important to capture the date and the time and the URL of what you're capturing. And of course, if you use Hunchly, that's all automated. But if you don't, you want to make sure that you somehow through note taking or through whether it's that video recording, that all that information is captured.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you were talking about Hunchly, I think for someone like me, that I come mainly from the digital forensics field, I think one of the things I was missing when I was working in the OSINT was the evidence preservation. That is very highly important, as you mentioned, in the law enforcement area, because you need to preserve, but also to make sure that when you present those captures to anyone, would be considered trustful for a lawful process. So definitely, I love Huntly, and I think probably now that we are moving everything to the, let's say, to the cloud, and we have less artifacts in our endpoints, probably in the future we need to also, as an OSINTers, to really take care of this part of the digital custody of the data we collect. Definitely, I was, when you were talking, it came to my mind that I think there you had like a couple of highly interesting blog posts in the OSINT Curious community, but maybe you can also to introduce, for in case anyone doesn't know, that it will be complicated, but because most people know the OSINT Curious project, but you can briefly introduce what you do there and talk about this post you did in this community, because I think one of the most visited ones was related with the Internet Archive that you mentioned, that about capturing evidence, and this project is specifically doing that. If you can elaborate a little bit more about those articles, please.
Sure. Yeah. So the OSINT Curious project is, I'm part of the advisory board there. It is a group of, I'm going to say, I work with some really talented OSINT people, and from around the world. They're not just from one region, which is really awesome because you get different perspectives. But what we offer is free resources related to OSINT research or investigations. And one of those things is writing blog posts. There's even a huge amount of 10-minute tips that we've done in video form to help people walk through certain techniques, because this is open source information, and we want that people are going to do open source investigations and research, we want them to do it the right way. And so OSINT Curious is a really great resource, I believe. And like you said, I have written a few blog posts, and one of them was the one related to the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. So the Wayback Machine is, I'm going to say, out of my top 5 OSINT tools, 100% is on that list, because there's so much you can get out of the Internet Archive. And for those that don't know what it is, it's the Internet Archive, or I use that, kind of interchange that, but with Wayback Machine, but it's a resource to pull historical information, essentially, from, say, a website. So what you can do is you can use this resource. So if you're working on a file and you have a company's website, and you're like, hey, I want to know what it looked like 5 years ago or 2 years ago, or even more, because I believe the archive started in 96, if I got that right. But you can plug in that website into the archive and see what it looked like in 2002, maybe 2010, and so on, even last year. But that depends on if it was captured by the site. But keep in mind, a lot of websites are captured on the archive, so you might be in luck. I've been using this tool for so many years, and again, it's one of my top tools that I would use. It's free, but you can end up finding a lot of information using it. And yeah, like my blog post is pretty detailed in terms of how you can use it and how it could be useful. But yeah, I definitely, I can go on and on about the archive just because how useful it's been. But that's one of them. There's also another blog post I wrote about. I don't know if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so the other one that I wrote was related to creating accounts, like research accounts and sock puppets, because we always want to, the reason why we create these kind of fake personas is because we want to keep our real identity away from our investigation. Because at the end of the day, whether, I'm Ritu Gill, well, I'm that law enforcement person, say. Well, I want to keep that away from, hey, I'm searching so-and-so. So that's why we create sock puppets. The blog post is pretty relevant, I'm going to say, even though I wrote it a while back. One of the things I would say is asking yourself what your sock puppet is for. Like, do you do active or passive OSINT? Active is where you're engaging and you actually need to look like a real person, versus passive. You still need to maybe look like a real person, but you don't have to, you're not going to be engaging, right? And I do 100% passive OSINT. So I do mention and explain what that means in the article. It is getting harder to create these accounts without a phone verification, like a code that they want you to verify that it's, it's a real person. So you still having a burner phone is really helpful. One of the things I can recommend that maybe is new is, if the process isn't working for you because it doesn't believe that you're, actually real, well, some people will try doing or creating an account with a VPN on. Well, sometimes that's a red flag and it doesn't allow you to. So there are times where I've had to switch off the VPN and create my account. And then later on, I've turned my VPN back on. And even then, they might ask for a verification code. But once I, plug in the SIM card, I do the thing, there's no issues after that. So that's my experience. The problem with research accounts is there's no clear steps that would work every time. So it's really hard to say, like, hey, like, people will reach out and be like, hey, how do you create an account? The problem is it is trial and error, and that's how we have to kind of work through it. And with experience, you kind of start figuring out sometimes your own process.
Yeah, I think this sock puppet thing is really something challenging nowadays. I remember recently some people in the community mentioning that, for instance, Instagram was asking for the validation of the people like using the camera, and also like doing
Yes.
some recognition, and people they were posting some avatar doing some mechanisms trying to generate these fake personas, but in a 3D manner, because it's how Instagram is now managing that. So do you want to mention something about that, or?
Yeah, like I think I did read about that as well. Some people were having some issues with that. That said, I mean, there are so many open source tools out there. I can't remember the site that people were using at this time, but that could be hit or miss as well. Like, it could work for you. My only thing is never use someone else's photo. And if you're going to use a photo, like, and I've done this on a SOC account where I used a photo from this person does not exist.com, where it's not a real person. So I used that. I altered the photo a bit, and it actually worked for a LinkedIn profile. So I was pretty happy about that. But would that work for Instagram? It might, but I'm not sure. But the main thing is not using a real person, like someone else's photo, not using your own photo either. I typically, when it comes to like, I haven't had that situation where I've like submitted a photo like that. What I end up doing is usually if it's something where they're asking for a photo, I usually just shut the thing down there and move on. Because I don't wanna, like, I feel like it just sets up more red flags, and usually it's like they've detected something sketchy that I might not be able to overcome at that point.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how investigations and investigators are evolving as well. So, like, you might be setting up a sock puppet account with a picture from this person does not exist. But what do you also think about? I'm just openly with your thoughts here. So I know that there are data providers who do give you access to a plethora of social media accounts via API or via non-attribution platforms. How does this differ to you spending the time to develop an account on a platform and use that for various purposes?
I feel like I don't use that really, where I use a data provider that will give me the SOC accounts. I prefer to do it on my own because I feel like I just have more control of, what's, at the end of the day, if I'm going to court or I have to speak to a customer and say like, hey, this is what it is, it's easier to speak to what I did and my process and what I set up and when I set it up and who else has used my account or profile or all that kind of stuff. But that being said, like for some people, and depending on what type of work you do, having that third party do it for you might be important. It might be easier and it might avoid a lot of the hiccups that come along the way. I think I'm a little old school when it comes to like, hey, I'm like, I'll just do it on my own. I can figure this part out. Not saying I don't use any special software, I do. But for something like this, I tend to just rely on myself and go through the process of, creating accounts. And of course, because I've been doing this for a long time now, I have historical accounts that have like built up their own little history or background, which kind of helps me, or I can kind of avoid having to create those new accounts all over again. That said, it's not like I have only one account. I have a lot of different research accounts for different purposes in different names.
That's really cool. All right, so we've spoken about OSINT Curious and various websites. I think you're a contributor to SANS as well, just like Carlos is. Probably the only odd one out here who's not on that SANS goodness. But let's talk about, maybe you can tell us about your own website. I know that you have a lot of resources and a lot of really cool stuff up there. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so back when I started my own company, I created OSINTTechniques.com, and that's my website. I do update it from time to time, but I'm going to say I have a bunch of resources on there, whether it's related to creating research accounts or, other OSINT tools. But I'm going to say that I have all that information up there for people to use. But I'm more regular with posting on places like Twitter. I'll do posts, depending on how busy I am, but I typically try to post resources every week for sure. I do. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's not, but I like to share some of the new tools that might help people out there, because people are working different types of files and they need different resources. So I do that a lot. One of the other things on my website, so OSINTTechniques.com is my website. I also I write short courses, and I do that through cybertraining.ca. However, it is not for the general public per se. It's law enforcement and kind of like corporate investigators that can take those courses from that website. So I also do that, and you'll find me on that website as well. So you'll find me in a lot of different places online in general, but those are some of the things that I'm doing, and just trying to. I like to be involved in the OSINT community, so I have a lot of people reach out to me. I try to, reach back as much as I can and share some of my experience and see if hopefully it's helpful to people.
Yeah, that's cool. I think I could say on behalf of the community, because I probably they are listening to this podcast right now. Thank you for all the time and effort you take for sharing, because I think one of the most important things, especially in this ever-changing landscape of OSINT, is sharing in a daily basis. Something you share probably some months later won't be useful. So I think many of the things you do and other colleagues from the communities helping us here for our daily investigations. So thanks for that. So let's continue talking about the future. Probably we are not going to let's try to predict or to guess the evolution of this, and based on your background and in your current experience, many years working in this field, what do you think are going to be the main issues or constraints that are going or that are already impacting nowadays investigations, but probably will impact or will make our investigations more difficult in the future? What's your take?
I think that's an interesting question because I believe that the more people being interested, there are a lot of people interested in open source, and I see this almost every day where people are like, hey, how do I get into this OSINT thing? I heard about it. And just because of the online community is so large now that it's easier to learn for some people. That being said, I feel that OPSEC is a little concerning sometimes. So when new people get, involved in OSINT and, they want to try out new things, well, they don't always realize the OPSEC mistakes they can make. And sometimes because they don't know any better or they don't have the experience, they think, okay, well, I'll just use my phone for OSINT. I'll just use my personal Facebook for OSINT. And so I really do think that's going to be a challenge a little bit, but it's also up to people to do the due diligence to understand fully what OSINT is and what it involves. Understanding what OPSEC means, like having good OPSEC when we're conducting these investigations. I think hopefully that conversation will continue in the future where people are more aware and understand the implications of bad OPSEC, right? And how it can compromise you or your investigation. So that's one of the things I feel like is still going to stick around. And I only see it because I see so many new people in the OSINT community. And so hopefully they can connect those dots as they go along. The other thing is when it comes to just future, I'm just trying to think, there's different aspects, right? Like if you're somebody like that works for law enforcement and you have to go to court, I think that is always at my forefront where I'm like, okay, the future of what this looks like could change drastically because of case law. So because of precedents, right? So it's always like, hey, we need to make sure we do a good job with our open source because pretty much like we can ruin it for other people in that law enforcement community. That's what I think of. That being said, on the other side, when you're not part of that at all, well, there's still going to be, I think there's still the future. I think it looks good, but it's also things like the things we have to deal with, like the challenges of like encryption, more encrypted chats and different apps people are using where we can't get the information. When it comes to challenges, I'm going to say these three things. The bad case law. So case law is law that's established before by previous decisions. We want to make sure we don't set up bad precedents for others, right? But there's also things like I mentioned, encryption. Well, that's already an issue, and there's some things that we won't have access to. But the third thing was also the future is you've probably seen the rise and fall of new platforms. So for us OSINTers, it's learning those new platforms. Do I know everything about every platform? I don't. I'm aware of many, but there's times where, there's a new one that's, being used by a certain community. Well, I have to, take the time to, learn about it, find the ways we can exploit it in a safe way. So those are some of the things I feel will be interesting in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. I think nowadays we are facing also as I'm coming from as a forensicator in the past, we have to deal with huge amounts of information, huge amounts of data, because every individual is sharing a lot of things from work and personal life for sure. Yeah. And what you mentioned is the truth that we. When we began with this, only a few social media platforms were out there, and nowadays probably every single game or every single application has their own messaging platform and many things. Now I cannot imagine with all these metaverse thing in the future.
Yeah.
We will live this second life in somewhere. Also, that will be complicated to keep, keep the pace and know every single thing. So probably we will have to learn every day different things and just be very fast with that.
Yeah. It's like data overload, right? When it comes to some of the stuff, because when we go out to seek a goal, and looking to find a particular thing, sometimes you just come across someone who is like has a large online footprint, posts every single day on multiple platforms. Like it could be a lot to go through, right? But those are one of the challenges that analysts, like OSINT analysts, have, is you end up sometimes with a lot of data that you need to go through, and then sift through and be like, hey, what's meaningful here, and hey, what isn't as meaningful.
Definitely. So my last question from my side, as we probably are running out of time, and I'm a very curious person, and I always ask these kind of things. I think every professional has their own stories on your back, and I would like to ask you, of course, if you can talk about it, anything that is not like very sensitive, if there is any interesting investigation, curiosity, something funny even that happened to you when you were beginning your career. Is there something that pop ups to your mind?
Trying to think, like, not really. I'm gonna say not maybe funny or curious, but I'm gonna say rather like interesting. I use that word a lot. So there's times when I've looked at, so I usually can't talk about files I worked on per se, but what interesting thing I've found with certain targets is, I'm looking for a target, say on Facebook. And, often we're always like, hey, I hope their friends list is open. Hopefully it's a public friends list so you can go through it. Well, often going through that list, I see when targets have multiple Facebook accounts, for some reason, they friend themselves. So, and I'm not saying I've seen this once, I've seen this so many times that I don't even know what to think. But so essentially, if I find that target's Facebook, I go to their friends list, it's open. Well, I go through it, and when I see, I'm like, hey, they've friended their own old account or new account, whatever it is, multiple times. So now they've helped me find their online footprint, which I'm like, I just find that interesting that they do that. And I'm not sure why exactly, but it's been really helpful when it comes to just connecting those dots and finding more of the breadcrumbs that we always look for when we're searching for, someone's platforms. But yeah, so like I said, not very funny or anything, but I just thought it was interesting because I've seen that as a trend. And I've seen it over many years, and it's still not stopping because I still see it to this day. And so I'm like, okay, people are really interesting when it comes to, how they connect, and, when they have multiple social media accounts on the same platform. And sometimes it's like they have an older Facebook that they just dropped, and then sometimes it's one that's where it's, here's my clean Facebook, and here's where I'm not such a good person, or but yeah, I always found that kind of interesting when it comes to their online footprint.
That's really cool. Yeah, there's unintended things that you find out, isn't it? So here's my last question to you. Might be a bit of a strange one, but I think it might be interesting to you as well, because we've covered like the future of OSINT and where investigations and platforms are evolving, with technology evolving as well.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, with everything that we've learned about the resources, where to go, what to look for, and the evolution of technology and everything else that we expect to happen in the future, what are three things, just the top three things, that you would pass on to in terms of advice to anyone who's getting into this field?
I would say honestly, number one that comes to mind is being curious. Because when you have that curiosity, it keeps you going, right? So it's making, get it. If you're curious, you're going to read the blog posts, you're going to read the books, you're going to listen to the podcasts. You're going to also maybe reach out to people that are well known in the OSINT community for maybe guidance, right? You can do that as well. Some people are really open to that. That for sure. What else? I'm going to say, when it comes to the second thing is being organized. I know that sounds so basic maybe, but when we have so many different OSINT tools being thrown around, I feel when you're organized, and what I mean by that is sometimes the way I organize my OSINT tools is by like a search entity type. So if I have an email address, where are the 10 places I can go? I really recommend that because I can't remember everything. I'm getting older. And so I feel like when you have this reference point, it will help you. So it's just one of those things, again, being organized with your tools. And you can do that. Some people like to write it down. Some people want to type it up in Excel as a checklist, something. I really think that's important just because it's so easy to get overwhelmed by OSINT resources so quickly. And then the third thing is, let me think, the third thing, I'm going to go back to working on critical thinking. I'm going to say that is a really big asset when it comes to OSINT research and investigations. And if you can dedicate time to learning in a better way and being able to look at something critically, so that could mean taking a course. It could mean, there are resources out there that, help you with that. I would focus on that as well. I think those three things together, I think you could be really successful.
That's really cool. I think I couldn't agree more with organizing yourself with where you need to start looking for things. Getting overwhelmed is one of those starter issues, isn't it? Otherwise, I think I just want to thank you for your time as well. It's been really cool having you with us. A lot of learning from your experience and everything that you've been into. So big thank you from us at Maltego. And don't be a stranger. I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. No, I'm happy I got to be on the podcast, the Maltego podcast, and thanks for having me. And great to meet both of you.
Thank you for coming. See you very soon.
Awesome. Thanks.